All right. I'm the interim chair for Economic Matters. I'm going to call to order today's meeting. And for the record, we have Alderman Brooke Schandelmeyer present. Alderman Gay is unable to make it. And we also have a special guest of Alderman Ross Arnett. So let's get the agenda modified. We need to make a modification to the agenda.
So moved.
All right. So are you moving it to add the appointment of, what was his name?
Bowman.
Reed Bowman to the Heritage Commission. All those in favor of approving the modified agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, motion carries. And next, I'd like to move, we have to have an election for the permanent chair. And I'd like to make a motion that Alderman Schandelmeyer be made for chair of the Economic Matters Committee.
I will second.
All those in favor of making Alderman Schandelmeyer the chair, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Congratulations. And I'm passing the virtual gavel over to you, Alderman Schandelmeyer.
Thank you, Alderman Savage. All right, moving on to the agenda. Up first, we have AP 222, the appointment of Michael Thomasini to the Maritime Advisory Board. Is Mr. Thomasini available?
There he is.
I'm here.
Hey, did I pronounce your name correctly, sir?
I don't know. I was being promoted when you said it, but I'm just going to say for the sake of brevity that you got it.
That is very generous of you. Thank you. Well, first of all, welcome to the Economic Matters Committee. Thank you for being willing to step up and serve with us. Do any of my colleagues have questions for Mr. Thomasini on his experience, on his resume, and his capacity to serve in this role?
Yeah. A few questions, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so, you know, we all know your background, Mike, and so it's not a question about qualifications at all. So I'm glad that you're interested in serving. I guess my question I do want to just pose to you would be, what do you, and I think we also know what you bring, but in your mind, what do you bring to the board, and what would you like to, do you have any goals for your term on the board, and what you'd like to focus on or push them on?
Well, so thanks for the opportunity to speak on this. Mike Thomasini, I own and operate 2 maritime businesses in the city. I have been on the Maritime Advisory Board as Alderman Arnett's designee since 2000. How long has it been, Ross? Sometime in 2017, I think.
Yeah, a long time.
So I have good experience with the board, good working relationships with its members, and I think what I'm looking to accomplish, and I think, you know, the big swing for Maritime was really maybe in the last 18 months with the Maritime Task Force. So, you know, a lot of that work has been done. I'm hoping to be able to participate on both a Maritime Advisory Board level and as a small business owner in what we decided was the true up and the reporting of you know, the changes that we made and whether or not the outcomes from that were what we expected to be. So from that end of it, I think that's the thing that I'm going to find the most important going forward.
No, that's great. And you know, it'd be nice if you're interested, in light of your background, if you know, it's up to the chair, but I'm going to throw out the idea of if you'd be able to come back to this committee in the future just to give any kind of report from that perspective on the in terms of what the Maritime Advisory Board might be looking at on that subject.
Yeah, actually, I think that's really important. There, you know, there weren't a lot of changes, but some of the changes were significant, and I think that it's a worthwhile activity to make sure that we got it right.
Yeah, I would actually be interested in that because there is something I'm working on unrelated to the Maritime Advisory Board, but it's going to heavily influence. It's basically an economic gardening program to help like entrepreneurs, small businesses create jobs in the city, in our community. And we're talking with Stephen Rice. He wanted to maybe potentially focus on maritime industry for that as like the pilot program. So that would be a very very nice connecting thing of some various projects we're working on. Alderman Arnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You should know that Stephen Rice gives an economic update report to the Maritime Advisory Board at every meeting. The board is comprised of people with lots and lots of experience, and the meeting was last night, and they, I thought you guys were very good to the mayor. I know he was expecting a hostile audience, but they came up with very good suggestions and comments, and it's one of those meetings that's really worth going to if you get a chance, because they do talk about a lot of stuff. And given that Annapolis is a maritime city, it's got to be one of our more important committees.
All right, colleagues, anything else? All right, do I have a motion for a favorable recommendation for Michael Thomasini to the commission, to the Maritime Advisory Board? I will second. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right, congratulations. Thank you, sir. Up next is AP 322, the appointment of Emily Thomasini to the Recreation Advisory Board.
Wow, look at
Very
that.
long digital commute. Welcome, Ms. Thomasini. How are you
What are
today?
the chances?
Excellent. Do any of my colleagues have questions or notes for Emily Thomasini?
Yeah. I guess could you just? I did take a look at your application, but could you just go over some of your background and interest and same questions? What you might be in terms of this is the different board, the Recreation Advisory Board. So, what about?
Tell you
What interests you in that board?
Yeah, and what typically my husband, I've stayed in the background and avoided this as long as I could, but I'm quite passionate about recreation and kids specifically in recreation. And my kids go to Eastport Elementary School. I've been very involved there. My background before we ran the pirate ship, I worked for Arundel County Rec and Parks. That's what I did kind of right out of school, and I absolutely loved it. I was brought on to institute teen programming. It was a new position, which made me really kind of delve into recreation as a career. I went to a lot of conferences. So I've got a pretty broad understanding of what can be accomplished in recreational programming, kind of, because I worked with other counties to develop the teen programs. And then in my business, I book all the field trips, and I've stayed in contact with a lot of the recreation professionals, and they book with me, and I've just kind of been able, we still talk the talk, and so I've kind of kept up on it. Then when I got to Eastport, I have a 5th grader at Eastport and a kindergartner now, so I'm there for a while. I started after school programs. They didn't have a lot of after school programs going on, and we have a wonderful principal, and she says, parents, what do you want to do? And we say we want to do this, and she says, okay, great. So I started after school programs, and I was shocked by the need, and the kids just, we put it out that we're going to do something, and there's a waiting list within a day, and we always have to do first come, first serve, because it happens so quickly. If I do a soccer program, the school is 280 kids. I end up with 100 kids, and I can only serve 25. So that led me kind of to this. I also was very involved with Play Eastport. I was the design chair. And if you don't know what Play Eastport is, it's we raised a bunch of money, built a new playground, added a soccer field, and we're about to hopefully add a basketball field. And during that, I kind of got involved in the city process. And so that's kind of what's led me to here. And my main goal at this point that I want as many kids as possible to be able to take advantage of the facilities and the programs at the city level. And it's almost an agenda.
Sounds like a good agenda. And that I'm guessing includes the pool, because I think you have at least one child that is on the swim team, right?
And that all came up yesterday, right? And I was like, oh.
Unfortunately, yeah. I think we've gotten it sorted out, but that's be one good thing I think for the board
and
to
I
look
believe
at more.
that it would, right?
So thank you.
Thomasini, I want to thank you for your interest in the position. Your background's very very impressed with this. I appreciate how you have this goal of expanding out recreation opportunities for every member of our community, even in wards and areas that are less served. So thank you. Alderman Arnett, before we make a motion to give a recommendation, would you like to add anything?
No, I certainly was one of the people making this recommendation. I didn't realize you went to school near where I'm from.
Oh.
I'm from Medina, and my mother went to Syracuse. So, we're from the same area, or went to school in the same area anyway.
Excellent. So in that case, do I have a motion for a favorable recommendation?
So moved.
I will second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Excellent. Congratulations, Emily. Thank you.
Hey.
Up next, AP 422, the appointment of Alan Miller to the Maritime Advisory Board. Is Mr. Miller here?
Looks
He is
like it.
here. He's been promoted.
Excellent.
I'm back. I lost you. Do you have me now?
Yes, sir.
You can take him.
Loud and clear. Are you able to turn on your camera, or if not, that's fine too. We just got to be able to hear you.
How about there?
Perfect. Excellent. Well, Mr. Miller, thank you for your interest in joining in this position. Colleagues, do we have any questions for Mr. Miller?
Yes. Mr. Miller, could you explain a bit about, because looking at your application, your background seems more military oriented, but can you explain what you want to bring to the Maritime Advisory Board, and similar to what I asked the others, like if you have any goals that you'd like to pursue for the board?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, thanks. I appreciate the opportunity. Obviously, I like to serve. I spent 32 years doing it until about 2.5 years ago. In the military, as a CSM, I sat on a lot of advisory boards, project management work, and specifically maritime capabilities, maritime projects. This school, or that position there, brought me to Annapolis in 2006. And I've been coming up to Annapolis since then because we conduct a good majority of our training up here. Fell in love with the place, started coming up here on leave, and then just working in the local maritime area. So my background, a lot of board experience, Annapolis, in and out since 2006. I live here now. And just that advisory board experience is what I bring. My maritime experience, you're correct, is more military based, but working with civilian maritime companies is what I've done since 2006. Some of my goals, honestly, I don't have the experience here in Annapolis that a lot of you folks have running this small business. I'm dealing with diesel mechanics, electricians, all local businesses, charter companies on a daily basis. And since I've been kind of in this role here at the school, a couple of things that have jumped out to me have been, number one, workforce development. We have a lot of opportunities to get on the water here, but there's a lot of people that don't share those opportunities. We work on a little bit over here. We're trying to work with some other organizations to do that. And I think there's enough small businesses around here. If we kind of work together, we can work down that road. And then one of the other things that jumps out at me, this is a waterfront community. And I've seen waterfront communities that were easy and ones that were hard. And given the growth in the boat industry over the last 2 or 3 years and over COVID, there's a lot of folks that if we don't keep making proactive changes, we're going to lose them in the maritime industry. And so I think that's just something that we're cognizant of here at the school. We see it here at the school a lot, from the roughly 3,000 students a year that walk through the door and that are trying to work in the industry, especially the lower end professionals. And I think with kind of how I ran some of the maritime programs in the military and then having a view here and daily interaction at the school, I kind of think that's what I bring to the board, or that's where I can help out.
Mr. Miller, I greatly liked how one of the things you were sure to touch on was workforce development and trying to actually grow industry within the community itself here. So appreciate you coming into this with that as part of your goals. Alderman Arnett, do you have any questions for Mr. Miller? Alderman Tierney, would you have any questions for Mr. Miller? No? Cool.
No, thank you. Thank you.
Excellent. In that case, do I have a favorable motion for the appointment of Mr. Miller to the Maritime Advisory Board?
So moved.
I will second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Excellent. Congratulations, Mr. Miller.
All right. Thank you very much.
Next, AP 522, the reappointment of Peter Trogdon to the Maritime Advisory Board. We don't usually have the reappointments here, but let's try just in case. Is Mr. Trogdon here? No? All right.
I'll make a motion if you want to favorably recommend.
I will second the motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Excellent. And finally, we have the no real number to it, but the appointment of Reed Bowman. Excuse me, I'm trying to pull up the exact thing. The appointment of Reed Bowman to the Heritage Commission. Mr. Bowman had a conflict and was unable to make it tonight, but because he did do that, give us a heads up in advance. We have his resume and information. I personally believe we can give a favorable recommendation to this. Alderman Savage, do you agree?
I agree, yeah.
Excellent. Do I have a motion for a favorable recommendation for Mr. Bowman?
So moved.
I will second. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Excellent. All right, moving on to legislation before the committee. Up first, we have O3821, illicit discharges and connections of stormwater. Moving on for discussion. Who's the sponsor of this?
I think it came from the administration, so I think Buck.
From the administration. Do we have anyone from the administration who would like to discuss the bill, or? No?
If not, I can give a briefing.
Yeah, sure.
Ms. Green, is there anybody from Public Works or?
Mr. Johnson is here.
Oh, good.
Bring him on.
And the cat's here too.
I like the cat appearing, Ellie. Never apologize for it. Mr. Johnson, welcome, sir.
Yeah, good evening. Good evening, Council Alderman.
Good evening.
Alderman. That piece of legislation is a fairly straightforward embellishment to our illicit discharge detection and elimination program. What it does is that it allows city inspectors, gives them the authorization to enter onto private properties to cause illicit discharges to be abated. And by illicit discharges, what I'm referring to are discharges that would foul the stormwater system. While our sanitary sewer is treated, the sewage is treated, the stormwater flows directly to the bay, ultimately. So they are prohibited discharges such as oils or other objectionable discharges that our permit does not allow to be placed into our storm sewer system. We are required as a permittee to enforce that the provisions of the permit, and this allows our inspectors to enter on the property to do just that.
Excellent. One thing when I was kind of going through some of the staff reports and the fiscal notes, there is no fiscal impact. So this basically just lets our inspectors have a little more leeway with where they can go and the capacity to do their job. Is that correct summary of it?
Yeah, that's basically it.
Alderman Savage, I saw you had a question.
Yeah, I just want to clarify for the council members here, Mr. Director Johnson. So this, just to confirm, this is a requirement of our MS4 permit, right?
That's
that we
correct.
have.
Yes, yes, it is a requirement. Right. It's one of the minimum control measures that are in there. 6 minimum control measures that our permit requires us to comply with as part of protecting or controlling the discharges, the quality of the discharges to our storm and sewer system. And the illicit discharge detection and elimination is a big piece of that. We're required to have developed a manual, which we are almost complete with. We're required to adopt this legislation of this kind, which is before you tonight. And then we're required to actively inspect our outfalls and enforce the provisions. So we look for dry weather flows. So we look for the outfall to be draining when it hasn't been rain for a few days. And that sort of is indicative of the fact that you have a connection that is not really appropriate. It's not stormwater that is flowing out of it. And then you test it and try to figure out where it's coming from and then take steps. And in the process of doing that, staff may have to enter onto private properties to discharge those responsibilities. And this legislation gives them the ability to do that.
Can you give an example of an illicit discharge that we may have or that you've had elsewhere in your experience?
Sure. In some areas, like it depends on the adjoining land use, the abutting land use. Like in some restaurant districts that are not as good as Annapolis, you sometimes have there's a cost to disposal of oil, of cooking oil, and some enterprising merchants or restaurateurs may use the catch basins, the drains, as a way to dispose of it. So that's one type of discharge that you really don't want. So
not
also,
here, right?
No, not here. I mean, I don't think we've seen that here. I haven't seen that here yet, but it happens in some areas. And then in other areas, depending on the land use, again, if you have like a lot of like repair shops, again, sometimes the oil makes its way into the basins as opposed to being properly containerized and disposed of. And then in other areas, you could have discharges from swimming pools, like in areas that have swimming pools. They would sort of empty the swimming pool into the storm drain, and that really is sending highly chlorinated water or salt water, depending on the pool, into the surface water body, and that affects the macroinvertebrates and affects the health of the water body in general. So those are like three examples.
Yeah, thank you. And do you see any kind of economic impact to this program? Is it going to be impacting our businesses at all?
To businesses? Not really. I think that it would really sort of help any scofflaws, and there would always be a few who may not care to really comply rigorously with it, but it would help them to come in line. So I would see a net positive. I wouldn't see that if you are a person complying with the regulations, that there'd be any cost to your business. I mean, if you can be fined, and the fines for this kind of violation can be quite severe. So, there could be like a civil action taken, and that can be quite severe in terms of cost. But really, in my experience, most people, once they understand the regulations, comply with them. And we don't really have to really use that particular aspect of our police powers to gain compliance.
And this, about 90% of this came from a model ordinance, right, from the EPA?
It did. And the reason for that is that the program really is an EPA program, which comes out of the Clean Water Act that was the President Nixon was after the Cuyahoga River in Ohio, I think, caught a fire. When the river catches a fire, you know that you're not living right, as they would say, right? Yeah. So President Nixon sort of implemented the Clean Water Act, the EPA, pardon me, which then developed the Clean Water Act. And that has served as the model. That, and actually Montgomery County in Maryland was the first entity in the United States to really develop this kind of idea. And they were a little ahead of the EPA. The EPA then borrowed and built on their work, and then it spread nationwide. So this NPDES, non-point elimination discharge elimination system, is found in every state in some way, shape, or form, in every region of every state, because it's a federal mandate. And it really is designed to protect the waters of the United States, the surface water bodies, which, as I said, anything that runs off the streets doesn't really get treated. It flows eventually to the surface water bodies.
Thank you. That's all I have, Mr. Chair.
Excellent. Thank you, Alderman Savage. So in order of when I saw hands go up, Alderwoman Tierney and then Alderman Arnett.
Oh, thank you very much. This got my attention. Hypothetically speaking, if a restaurant had grease going into a storm drain, then this would give us the authority to inspect and what would it do?
It
that it
really
doesn't do now.
I'm sorry. It really gives us the ability to enter onto the property in pursuit of the discharge. You're not really. If you had maybe the restaurant isn't the best example because the catch basins tend to be in the streets where we have permission to be there, but there are some times where lines may run onto properties or people actually make their own excavations into lines in ways that you cannot detect. And they may pour dye or something they want to get rid of that they don't really want to incur a cost for. And it eventually shows up at the outfalls. So in the illicit discharge detection and elimination inspection, the inspectors would detect that, and then their job is to trace it back to wherever it goes. Sometimes they can find it in the public right away where we have authorized permission, where we have permission to go. And there are other times when it is on your private property where this legislation gives them the ability to enter onto your property in pursuit of the discharge that they need to detect and quantify and eliminate.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Alderman Arnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to mention in passing, Alderman Savage and I have had a lot of opportunity to work with Director Johnson on a number of things. And I think we're very lucky to have someone of his caliber and experience. Apparently the director is looking at our code and finding deficiencies in a lot of places. And I think we're lucky to have him doing that. And this is just one example. And I certainly support the work that he has done for us here. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll second that.
Thank you.
Alderman Tierney, do you have another question or a comment, or is your hand still up from?
Oh, the hand is being lowered. There we go.
Excellent.
No,
in that case, do I have a favorable recommendation unless there's anything else?
Yeah, before I do that, I just also wanted to mention, I do have amendments on this. They're about 95% there. I've been working with a law office and also Director Johnson. It's nothing major, just basically a couple tweaks, corrections, and clarifications. And one just to put out there, I think at some point, and the director, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's going to be an accompanying resolution detailing the fine schedule.
Yes, that will be part of this year's budget, where there's a resolution that captures the fines, and I think it will be in that. It will be in that.
Okay. Do you think there's any reason? Did you foresee any reason that we would need to have that earlier, before the budget gets passed in June?
I don't think so, because as council is aware, the fines are often set by state statutes. So we would more or less just be copying. We can't set our own fines, so they're often set by statute. So I don't really think that there's anything that that was really going to be too surprising in the fine schedule that will be presented to you when in April when it's probably introduced.
Okay. And for the amendments, I think I think the director and I are mostly in agreement. There's just one we're working on still, but otherwise I think they're.
Yes, I did. I had a few meetings today. I haven't had a chance to really look at them yet.
No problem. I haven't had a chance to look at Jacqueline's comments either.
Would you like to
I would
delay action then until the amendments come up, or do you think they don't need to go through the committee process?
No, I don't. I mean, we'll be talking about the environmental matters. We did delay specifically for that. So unless, Mr. Chair, you want to specifically go over the amendments, but it's up to you. I'm okay with just moving it forward.
Yeah, I mean, I'm okay with it too. I mean, if you have everybody seemingly on board and it's just some language clarification and another committee's going to be hearing it, I'm cool with moving it forward. So in that case, do I have a motion to give a favorable recommendation to 03821?
So moved.
I will second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Excellent. All right, moving on. 0122 Fire
Thank you,
Prevention
Director.
Code.
Thank you.
Director Johnson. 0122 Fire Prevention Code Sprinkler Systems. Alderwoman Tierney, I believe this is your bill, correct?
Yes. Yes, this is like Groundhog Day. This is the third committee that's reviewed it today. That's okay. It's always nice to see Chief O'Malley.
So you and the chief have been busy today.
Yeah. I've probably heard this background before, and I know you look at the economics. Historic district. This is limited to Main and Francis Street. There is a reason for that. We want this to be as attractive to the owners as possible. And this is only where we have lateral lines for sprinklers to the curb. So it doesn't involve mucking up the street or digging up the street. And we also have, we wanted to make it as attractive as possible. So we have the sprinkler revolving fund. We also have a loan that's limited to $20,000. However, if you intend to use any renovated space because of the sprinkling addition, the loan is for $25,000. I mean, sorry, I have that. You have priority in the loan. It's first come, first served. But if you opt to have some residential use involved, you'll be prioritized, and then it will be increased to $25,000 if you use a minority contractor for the sprinkler line. From my perspective, in listening to the public safety, of course, sprinkling isn't a fail-safe method, but I look at it sort of as the weak link theory that, 60% of our buildings are sprinkled, the 40% that aren't. It sort of negates the others being sprinkled, because in this particular location, the walls are shared. The demising walls are shared. Fires can spread very quickly from building to building. But the most important part is that these are properties that cannot be replaced, as you know. And they are also economically a whole. You probably are aware of the most recent fire in the area, which is Duke of Gloucester. There was a Georgian colonial, law firm or real estate office. It doesn't matter. It was almost 2 years ago and it's still sitting vacant. So they're a detriment. And all of the fires downtown, the properties have been vacant, and where the new Starbucks is, and then up at the top of Main, and of course we all remember the Annapolis Yacht Club. But I'll have Chief O'Malley speak to it, or it's your choice, Chair, on where you want this conversation to go. But that was the basis. Yeah.
I'd be happy to hear from Chief O'Malley, and I should note for the record, the Annapolis Fire Department did send a letter of support in for this ordinance. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Excellent. Chief?
So I don't know how much more I can say than what the Alderwoman already has. Obviously, I am born and raised here in the city, and I've been in public safety since I was 16 years old. So all of my adult life and some of my teenage life, I've seen a majority of major fires in the downtown area. And the Alderwoman talked about a bunch of them, but Fran O'Brien's actually 2 major fires there. Chicken Roost, we had a fire there with people trapped in the inn upstairs years and years ago. And this is over the years. Then the Indian Palace at the top of Main Street, where we burned down multiple businesses. Those that have been around Annapolis for a long time know that that was basically a block of Main Street that was empty or burned out structures. It took years to get us back in there. And then on the bottom of Main Street, right around the jewelry store at Zachary's and where Starbucks sits now, that lot was vacant for a long time. So there's been millions of dollars worth of property damage and lost revenues, to include people's jobs. And after every major fire, we seem to get together and the committees put together and they ask what can happen. We've done a lot over the last 30 years. We have. There's been a lot done. I think Chief Manasseh will tell you that also. But what generally comes out of it, what they ask us in public safety, what can you do? And sprinklers are a big part of that. They're not a fail-safe. I'm not going to tell you we won't have a major fire downtown, even in a sprinkler building. I mean, it happens. We're humans, things happen. But for the most part, a sprinklered structure, there are not many in history where there's major loss of lights. And when the sprinklers are operating properly, it prevents the fire from spreading. It contains it until the fire department can get there. We've been very lucky over the years. But as for public safety, we obviously support this and any sprinklered structures that go in there because it enhances public safety.
You could look at it as like vaccination for buildings, I suppose, if you want to now put that into a simile. Chief Manassa, would you like anything to add, or Mr. Ruth, would you like anything to add on this ordinance?
I think Chief O'Malley has outlined the issues very well. I don't have anything to add.
Mr. Ruth?
No, pretty much nothing to add other than recapping what Chief O'Malley kind of said. You increase the life safety both for the occupants and for the firefighters. Passive fire protection like fire-rated walls and floors and exit corridors, they get you part of the way there. But the biggest tool in the toolbox is the suppression. We rely on it working. The city enforces maintenance of the systems. The only time they seem like they really don't work is when they're not turned on. Somebody inadvertently shuts the valve off. But other than that, they're pretty successful. Generally, all fires are put out with one sprinkler.
Alderwoman Tierney, I will call on you before we get to questions, if there are any from the committee.
Yes. Oh, sorry. Oh.
Well, let's let Alderwoman Tierney say her piece. I have two questions, and then we'll get to you if that's all right, Alderman Savage.
Sure, yeah.
I forgot to say that because this is economics, the economics committee, that although this is not, this can't be codified or anything, it is hoped, economically that this may activate the upper floors. If these buildings are sprinkled, if you walk down Main Street or up Main Street, you can look up and see a lot of these upper floors are not being utilized to the best that they could be. They're used for storage, what have you. So one economic model, which is hoped for, is you're a property owner. The city of Annapolis has a 5-year mandate to sprinkle your building. You have 5 years to probably develop a business plan to say, okay, I need to pay back this loan or pay back, whatever loan I take out to do this. Oh, well, then maybe I need to get more revenue. How do I get more revenue? Maybe I'll have an office upstairs, or maybe I'll have a residential use upstairs. So that's the economic, or hoping an economic benefit of this is that we will have optimal use of those upper floors, which other cities, other historic cities have had success because of this action. So thank you.
Feeling like you were tailoring that mixed use pitch for me, Alderwoman Tierney.
I wish I could say affordable housing. Downtown.
that will not exist downtown. I understand fully, and I won't bore the committee with.
And it doesn't guarantee residential, but it guarantees maybe some activity. We'll see.
I'm excited about the prospect of using space productively, whether it's commercial or residential. I just like mixed use spaces. They're great. Yeah, so I have two questions for you. The first one is the loan is $20,000 to $25,000, depending on the contractors used and the point and goals of the installation. How much does sprinkler installation traditionally cost on these buildings, though?
That's a loaded question.
I'm not trying to have it be one.
Yeah, hopefully one other thing about this is that because we asked for participation, that maybe we'll open it up to different contractors. Maybe there'll be some economy of scale. Maybe there'll be some different contractors. We seem to get the pricing from one contractor on all of these projects. I can't tell you. I've seen numbers from 80,000 to 220,000. I don't know if John and Mr. Manassa has any. No, you wouldn't, would you? You don't have any. Have you seen those quotes?
Well, we've definitely seen quotes over the years, but Chuck, Ruth is the fire protection engineer, is probably most familiar with pricing.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it depends on the particular building, the size, how tall it is. Those are some of the factors.
Yeah, getting the one cost though to go from the center, from the main to the curb, is that they don't have to do that. They have to tunnel in from the curb to the building, and that's the plumbing part that usually is the most expensive. And then of course the vertical, trying to find a chase. Ironically, the horizontal distribution is the easiest. But Mr. Ruth, you can speak to it.
I do think it's a variable, but I think we have some code, allowances that help us make the installs less expensive than more expensive at times. You can, you have different options. You don't have to run a dry system if you put insulation in the attic. Some places could actually use CPVC pipe. You get a tighter installation and it's less expensive. So there's a lot of different avenues you can follow to keep the cost down. Like you were talking about the vertical runs of pipe. Some of the buildings on Main Street are small enough that we don't necessarily zone each floor of the building. We can get it all off of one zone. So there's different options, and the fire marshal's office is always willing to entertain ways to try to reduce the overall cost.
Mm-hmm. And also, we do have a caveat, for lack of a better word, that Mr. Ruth put in the language that if it is impossible, because of the historic fabric of the building, we will look at alternate equivalent alternatives.
Okay. My follow-up question is, so on the financial report or the fiscal impact note, it says that there's a possibility of a lot of businesses applying for the current sprinkler loan fund that we have set up. Because we have businesses and building owners applying for it, that fund will go down. And we may need to potentially consider some alternatives for funding it. Have you had any thoughts or theories or any ideas, even if it's just rough? And if not, that's okay too, because I do think that it is better to get the ball rolling on something like this than try to map everything out in a perfect way.
Well, I don't think Director Dickinson is here, but okay, so there's about 40 businesses, 40, a little plus or minus, I think more than 40. I don't think they'll all apply at once. That's why we have the 5-year window of time so that they can be staggered. But the idea of a revolving fund is, yes, it's revolving. If they start paying it back so the fund is replenished, well, you can see that that's not going to happen to keep up with it, I guess. So I think the first year, hopefully people will apply, we'll have enough. But yes, it will be depleted. The payback won't be coming in as yet. So then fiscal year 24, we'll probably have to look at some additional funding of some sort.
Okay. That is all I had. Alderman Savage, any questions from you?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And so just to clarify, this would apply to both commercial and residential, or
no,
just commercial? Just
commercial.
Does the existing code apply to residential at all, or is that also? Because I know residential was mentioned, they look like they were excluded from the inspections, but
yeah, that was talked. Yeah, Chief O'Malley, why don't you explain the NFPA umbrella, if you will, and then.
So there's a couple things going on with this ordinance. The main gist of it was for the sprinkler systems on the Main Street and Francis Street, but when they decided to write this, and this was drafted before I became fire chief, so it was under the former administration, the former city manager and the former city attorney wanted to, well, they were big on fixing the city code and a lot of things in the city code that needed to be updated. So when the sprinkler ordinance was coming about, they decided, we'll take the fire prevention code and let's just clean it all up at the same time. That's why you see there's two different things going in here. We're cleaning up the fire prevention code and we're adding the sprinkler ordinance for the Main Street and Francis Street. But with that, residential properties fall under the building code. So Chief Manassas here and can talk about that. Single family and dual family dwellings are required, new construction are required under the building code to have sprinkler systems. So basically this sprinkler system requirement is for existing buildings, and that's all it does in here. We adopt NFPA 1, NFPA, which is the fire code, and then NFPA 101, which is the life safety code. And it's all promulgated by the State Fire Prevention Commission. So we adopt that by reference, and that gives us the authority for the sprinklers and the inspections on the businesses that we have. But single family dwellings fall under a different code, but it is required currently for new construction or when they go in and do a renovation. So basically it's all permitted inspections at that point.
What about, because some of these buildings are, well, yeah, what about the buildings that have the commercial on the first floor but residential on the second? Would the whole building still need to get sprinkled?
Yes, under this ordinance, the entire building would need to be sprinkled. Yes.
Okay, and so how many? Well, that's probably most of the street. Then I imagine how many just pure residences are there without any commercial component on these streets?
And John can maybe tell us more. I think that the only ones that may be zoned residential are probably on Francis Street there. That all Main Street's going to be mixed occupancy. So, and as we had the fire marshals go out and just do a survey just to update us on the properties there. And there's about 98 properties, commercial properties on Main Street and Francis Street that would fall under this. And 54 of them, I believe, or maybe a little higher. So we're over 51% already have sprinkler systems. I think it was about 40 to 49 of them somewhere in there that would fall under this ordinance.
That's on both streets?
On both streets, yes.
So 40 to 49 don't have sprinklers that would fall under this. Okay. And is there a plan for the residential? Like, should we be thinking about that? Are you concerned that they might not have to get sprinkled?
John can talk about that, but for residential structures, unless they're doing modifications, they'd have to change the building code to affect that. That wouldn't fall under the fire code. And I don't know where that would go. So,
from a fire safety standpoint, would you recommend we try to work on that in the future?
So I think that's something that we should probably study in the future. I don't know that I would talk about going into somebody's homes and requiring a residence to do it. I mean, the businesses downtown, we have the public in there all the time. Their occupancies vary with the amount of people compared to the single family dwellings and the double dwellings there.
All right. Ellie, did you have a response to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. My predecessor, Alderman Budge, during his tenure, he addressed the residential as best as he could at the time. John might be able to help me with the code reference, but it was if you do X percent of a renovation of a residential property, then you have to provide a fully sprinkled building.
Right.
Existing were grandfathered.
50% of the value of the home. I worked with Joe on that.
Was it 50?
So if the renovations are equal to 50% of the value of the home, you have to sprinkle. And then it got complicated in your ward and my house too happens to be plaster, because that makes sprinkling much more expensive when you have plaster that's going to melt on you.
Yeah. The logic here is real important, Alderman Savage, was the most expensive part of this is taking the water from the main in the street. So for residents to do that on a side street, they do get high estimates for that work. The majority of it is, as I said, this plumbing work. It's a plumber that does that work, that trenches the street and brings it in. So the logic here was that we had those lateral lines, and in fact, the language in the code says that as we continue to do this, put these lateral lines in, which is part of the intent, when we start undergrounding utilities and all that good stuff. But when we start putting in these lateral lines, we expect those commercial buildings to sprinkle within 3 years, I think the code says. This bill says. So just to kind of keep it going. Residential is a little bit more difficult. I would need a coat of armor to present that right now.
Fair enough.
And I don't think Chief Ramelli, duck. No. Yeah, ideally, yes. Ideally, of course, yes. But they are, yeah, go ahead.
Under the code currently, John will go into it, under the code currently throughout the city, when they do renovations in a single family dwelling or in a business, that the sprinklers may kick in for existing buildings. That falls under the code now, but that's only during the renovations and new construction.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in on Main Street and Francis. I'm not sure that there are, I would strongly suspect there are no residential buildings there that stand alone as a residential building. Most of those buildings on Francis, when you look at the Main Street side, you might go into a residence on Francis, but you're actually going above the retail or commercial space below. So, you know, I think that this is going to apply because the way it's written, that it's the building. So if you have a building, whether it be retail on Main Street on the first floor and residential off of Francis above, the whole building's going to get the sprinkler system. We're not parsing it out where commercial versus residential. So you're going to see the residential spaces along Main and Francis all get sprinklers along with this. Even though they're residential, they're still part of a commercial building. Mm-hmm. And as referenced, citywide, we do have other codes in place in 1712 that refer to when sprinklers are required in residential construction projects, new and existing. And so those are already in place and not being altered by this new addition to the code.
Okay. Well, thank you all. And so the original code, is that limit the sprinklers as well, just to those two streets, or was it broader than that, the current requirement?
So the current requirement that that the council put in was more of the historic district and encompassed the entire historic district. But there was a caveat in there that the state had to do some tax credits and some other issues for it to even apply, and that never did occur. So when this was dwindled down, it was mainly because the city is already, when they re-brick Main Street, they've run the laterals to the building. So that's been done. So when we looked at it, we felt it was a better sell at the time. Obviously, we would like the entire historic district sprinklered at some point, but you know, small steps, and it's taken this long to get here. And if I could just 1 second add that you all have now met Chuck Ruth, who's our fire protection engineer. So one of the commissions that were put together after the Main Street fire with the India Palace recommended we hire a full-time fire protection engineer. That was in the early 80s. Since then, we had some part-time stuff we did it several different ways, but thanks to all of you here that supported the budget last year, and I listened to Alderman Arnett that if you want to make a change in your budget, you got to stay within it. We were able to move some positions around, and we were able to get Chuck. So Chuck is a full-time employee for the city of Annapolis. He is an engineer. He works in the fire marshal's office, who works closely with planning and zoning. And he is a tremendous asset to the plans review process. So we're glad to have him. And I just want to thank you all for the support you gave us, because I truly believe, and all of you know how I am about getting fire engines and medic units on the street. But I truly believe that that position, and it'll help us with the future of economics in the city of Annapolis with some of these structures. So I just wanted to thank you all for supporting that.
Yeah,
we can only do that for traffic.
and Alderwoman Tierney, so you're good with that, even though it's kind of limiting the window more. You're to Francis and Main Street. You're good with that.
I'm great with that. It's a baby step, but it's great progress, and I do like the language that if we continue these laterals, then those they have a 3-year window. So yes. I think it's a great step.
Well, so digging into the legislation, I had some more specific questions. If people have it up on page 4 under the inspection section on line 23 under timing of inspections. I'm just wondering if this is a typo or not, because on line 23 it says within, and then it says in capital letters. I'm just wondering if there was an intended change here that was accidentally stricken.
I'm looking.
The page 4, line 23. I was just wondering why there was a capital IN, and so I wasn't sure. I wanted to see if that was a typo or.
So that does bring up a question. So this whole section is being deleted from the code. The NFPA standards give us general ideas when we need to inspect all business properties in the city. When the council changed the historic district and added that sprinkler ordinance that they had before, the city code actually required us to inspect properties in the historic district yearly. And I will have to look at that to see if that takes it out of the requirement. So NFPA may not require us to do it on a yearly basis, where the council did want us to do it yearly prior. So we'll look at that, and if we need to amend that, we'll ask for an amendment through the council.
Okay, great. And on the same page there, on the items that are stricken, proposed to be stricken on lines 36 through 45, well, actually going through the next page, but that whole section, those seem like, I'm a layperson when it comes to this, but it seems like those are important things to have in the code. Are they getting moved anywhere, or just they're not needed anymore?
So they're actually covered in the NFPA code, which we adopt early on in this. So it's sort of a duplicate, where originally somewhere along the line they wanted this to stand out, but it's already covered in the code. We've reviewed it with the fire marshal's office and also with planning and zoning, and we're comfortable that those permits are still required within our code. It's just not written in this section. It's adopted by the NFPA standards.
Okay. Good enough. Yes.
I just wanted to add that the logic there is once you start listing and something changes, then you have to go in back and revise that list. So it's best just to keep it, just to make the statement. We've had this before, Rob, with, if something's in the state code, we want to reiterate it with the chance of missing something or, that whole thing. So same kind of.
A little conversation about that. All right. And then on the same page, I guess page 5, not so much a question. Well, I guess it's a question for my colleagues. I wish Alderman Gay was here for this, because I'm sure he was one of the champions behind this. So it's a section on minority business enterprises. And I have some amendments I'm drafting, because ideally, I support the concept. I used to work for 2 of the environmental consulting firms I worked for were minority owned. It's important to have, but my amendment I'm thinking of is we would tweak this to make it require that they're local minority business enterprises, because frankly, I don't see why we would really want to support, for example, just some minority firm out in Frederick, when I think we really should be emphasizing local minority businesses if we can. And so it would further narrow down the pool, but I don't know, that's something I wanted to get my thoughts from Alderman Gay before I moved forward with it, but that was kind of what I was thinking there. I don't know if the sponsor has any thoughts on that.
My first reaction to that is, I don't know how many there are locally that it might be too restrictive. So therefore, opening it up a bit.
I guess one question would be, the fire chief or somebody else might know, are there any Annapolis businesses, period, that deal with sprinkler contracting that could install these services?
So I know that there's one with an Annapolis address that works in the area of the city. I don't know that they are a minority-owned business. all the contractors that do sprinkler systems have to be licensed through the state fire marshal's office to conduct any of that within the state of Maryland. So how many of those are minority owned businesses? I don't have an answer. I'm sorry.
So you think there's one at least business who would do this work in Annapolis?
There is one Annapolis-based business that I know of. Chuck, do you know of any others?
Yeah, I actually don't know of any businesses in Annapolis that other than the one you're talking about. And they're not even the city of Annapolis, right?
No, basically they have, they're on the outskirts of Annapolis. They just have an Annapolis address. That's correct.
The minority contractors, like locally, even close to Annapolis, I think are few and far between. To limit your geographical region might be limiting your pool of contractors.
Yeah, what I would be afraid of from a contractor perspective, they'd say, well, I looked in the city, there aren't any. So I think it could possibly backfire if our intent is to have a minority contractor. Again, not knowing how many there are.
Yeah. Well, I'll take your word for it. It sounds like that there just may not be enough businesses, period, to make that restriction. So I think you're right. It might be too restrictive. So, all right, I'll just abandon that effort. Another question on page 6 talks about I guess how there used to be an electrical assistance revolving fund, and the changes would remove that electrical system fund entirely, if I'm reading this correctly. Can you just explain why? Maybe it's no longer needed for all I know. Can you explain why it's being proposed to be removed and if that's a problem or not?
Want me to go first? The intention of that was very when that was done, it was realized that the old wiring was a fire hazard. So it was a proposed sort of initiative to say to owners, here, we have a revolving fund to help you with that. It didn't really work the way we wanted it to, but at the same time, with subsequent renovations downtown, and John Manasseh spoke to that this morning, is that they have done this rewiring and they didn't need city funds to help them. So that's a good thing, so logically, it's not needed. And then there were other discussions this morning about, well, can we just add it or combine them? And that, I think, would take away from the objective of this legislation. But John can speak more eloquently, I think, about the status of the old wiring and what he's seen and what has progressed. Right, John?
I can. I think you've done very well, Lee, as far as explaining what we've discussed. And I think there's just 2 points to make, is that revolving fund was created probably close to 30 years ago, maybe 25 if we really get down to the nitty gritty. But the knob and tubing wiring is to a great extent reduced from that time period. We've been working on that consistently whenever we have the opportunity, wherever we find knob and tube wiring. If there's any defective wiring, it's already in the code. Defective wiring has to be removed or repaired or replaced. So those are the things that we've been doing without this fund actually being an incentive. And I think the fact that there really hasn't ever been a request based on that legislation, I think it's just become obsolete over time.
Okay. All right, that makes sense. Same page, but line 38 to 40. It seems like good language to have. This is all loans are repaid back into the respective funds. Those amounts become available for new loans. At no time may the total outstanding balance of all loans exceed the total amounts made available in the budget process. Is this added later on, or are you thinking this just isn't needed?
Director Dickinson is not here, and I think this is related to finance and not dictating the terms of the payback, but I'm not positive.
Well, the part I like is in particular is that, you know, the total out. I know Time made the total outstanding balance of all loans exceed the total amount available in the budget process. That seems responsible to have, and I feel like I may have seen this later on in the legislation added back in some capacity, but I'd have to verify.
I can make a note of that and ask
Okay.
finance if there was a reason for the strikeout.
Okay.
Or maybe I don't know, is there a legal answer? Perhaps thinking it was not necessary. I don't know.
If I might, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Alderman Arnett.
It was always intended that the people, when the money was paid back, that it wouldn't just fall to fund balance. It would go back into this fund and remain available for the next person to come up to take out a loan. This may have been stricken because of recent displeasure with revolving funds. But in fact, this is a revolving fund. And I think I agree with Alderman Savage. This language makes sense, just making clear that these funds stay available for future loans, not fall to fund balance and basically empty out the fund. We may still need to put more money in the fund if we have a lot of demand, but we'd certainly like to keep the money once it gets into the fund available for future people that might want to take the loan. So it was put in with very specific intent.
Yeah, I guess, Mr. Chair, if could we make a request that the finance director take a look at this to see and get back to us at some point?
Yeah, we can delay action on this so we can get Ms. Dickinson in. Takia, could you invite Ms. Dickinson to our next meeting?
All directors are invited to every meeting, but I will make
Could
sure that she
you
knows
politely
that
request that we? Could you
ask
ask her?
I will mention it to the city manager so he can have her appear.
Excellent, thank you. Alderman Tierney, are you okay with delaying action on this until our next hearing, or is there a more time-sensitive element of this? I know it's always frustrating getting things kicked down the road another month, but
I would say that's, I don't know if that is a reason to postpone till your next meeting. I don't know if that's it is, I mean, I think it's understood that it has to be paid back. It says later on in the legislation, per terms of, I really believe it was deleted because it is understood, because it is defined as a revolving fund. And then that's just sort of insurance language, and they chose to delete. I mean, I don't, it's your call. I just don't know if that's a reason to delay action.
I mean, I'm fine with, Mr. Chair, I'm fine if finance director wants to get back to me, just individually, I can pass it along to the board, to the committee. Assuming we don't have anything else, we need to postpone this
right, that's what I'm saying.
as we go along. But Ms. Green, could you pass along that request to finance director to clarify page 6, lines 38 through 40 in terms of why that's being stricken?
Sure.
in that case, Alderman Savage, I personally am comfortable giving this a favorable recommendation. I know you want more information though. Do you want to move it out of committee with no recommendation, just so we can keep the ball going forward? Or actually, Alderman Arnett, I apologize. You had your hand up for a while when everybody else had questions. So before we get into up or downing or no votes, let's hear from you. You're on mute, sir.
Ross, you're on mute.
I'll thank the chair again. I strongly support the intent of this legislation, the main part of it. We need to sprinkle and protect as many buildings as we can, whether they're in the historic district or not. I also want to thank the chair of the Finance Committee. We had a very robust discussion this morning, and a lot of the questions I had were pretty satisfactorily addressed. I do think that we should be thinking more, and maybe I'll put in legislation to go back and look at the electrical stuff. I do think there is still knob and tube. And when we were discussing this at the council, this was under Mayor Moyer, it was the joint problems of not sprinkling and having knob and tube that made it hard for the second and third floors to get approval for residential occupancy. So I think there is something there that we need to pay attention to still. Maybe it has been resolved over time, as Mr. Manessa suggests. But I think that the thing that I want to bring to all the alderpersons' attention, and it was spoken to by Chief Romali, when we do an omnibus bill that is really focused on a particular thing, but we have all of these other changes going on, it would really be helpful in the staff report and in information presented to us by the various departments to explain all of these other changes. I think they're all, once you hear the explanation, they make a great deal of sense. But when you see big chunks being stricken or moved or reworded, I think it's problematic. But again, I do think that with the discussion we had at Finance, a lot of the concerns that I have had, and a lot of those are the same as the question you asked, Alderman Savage. I think a lot of those were addressed, and it probably, if we'd had a little more robust staff report, could have been headed off. So, but I certainly hope the committee recommends favorably this legislation. I think it's good legislation.
So, Alderman Savage, in regards to the up or down vote or something different?
Well, I mean, this is my only chance to have staff in front of me to address all my questions. So I'd like to go through all my questions on this. Yeah, I don't have any other chance, unless you want me to do it the last meeting, and I don't think Alderwoman Tierney would like me to do that at our council meeting.
If you have more questions, if you have more questions, please ask them.
Thank you. So on page 7, line 7, we've got a term long-term residential units, which is used. Is that defined anywhere? And how do you make that determination in terms of what's considered a long? I know we have short-term rental licenses, but I'm just wondering, this term seems like it might be tricky to
I think enforce. It's greater than 90 days.
Yeah, you know that, don't you? Yes.
That's right.
Yeah. It actually, he's correct. The intention there is to not promote. Yeah, it's exactly what it says for long-term residential units, residential as defined in Title 17. And let me just be clear. What I meant before about delaying, I meant if that was the only thing, but I'm very receptive if there's other changes that you want to make and it needs a delay. I just want to clarify that.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. Anyways.
All right, so it sounds like you're fine, and I believe anybody from law office, is that language okay? I'm not sure if we have long-term residential units defined. Does it need to be defined anywhere?
I think it's defined in Title 17 under short-term rentals or in that whole thing.
Well, I think I looked under 1704. 1704 definitions doesn't have it, which is one reason why I'm asking. Like, do we need to define it in Chapter 17? I'm assuming it's defined somewhere in Chapter 22.
Oh, sorry, 22. I meant under or 21, 22.
Anybody from the law office?
Or John, are you here? John, are you able to answer that? John Manassa?
Well, I don't have the ability to really quickly search, okay. But I'm not familiar with the term long-term residential unit, but it makes sense to me. in that it's the opposite of a short-term rental or a short-term dwelling unit. So I think I understand the intent, although I agree it's not defined in the code that I'm aware of.
Yeah, that's a good.
Okay, so I guess I'll add that to my list of questions for staff. And that's page 7, line 7. All right, and on the same page, so we have all these. Oh, never mind. That's loan approval. Also on the loan approval, same page, lines 30 through 36. Again, just seems like language that'd be useful. I guess that's another thing I'll ask the finance director.
Yeah, why those provisions are deleted. Yeah.
Yeah.
And tie that.
Did that come up at the finance committee at all? No.
Actually, it did not. Loan repayment did not come up. I know it came up in the sort of the interdepartment. You know, we had group meetings on this legislation with finance and fire, et cetera, and at the time, but Jody's not here to speak to it.
All right, and that's I'm almost done, Mr. Chair. Just going down to the last page, page 10. And this is not related to the content of the ordinance really, but again, I wish the law office was with us so anyway, page 10, line 6 and 7, this, I've never seen this in an ordinance before. It says, further established that, let's see, the catch lines or captions contained in the ordinance are not law, may not be considered to have been enacted as part of this ordinance. Have anybody seen that before? Alderman Arnett, you've been around the longest.
No.
I mean, that's not added, that's existing. That's funny.
Well, I've never seen this this is just language in the ordinance. It's not in the code. So I'm just, same thing with the section 4, lines 9 through 14, that says that publisher of the code can make small, it makes sense, but that they can make small corrections without action required from the city council. And I'm just wondering if this is a new standard. I've never seen that either. Have you all?
I have seen that. I think this smacks of a lot of the things that Linda Schuett was trying to deal with when she was here. There was a whole new philosophy in writing of code, but and I missed that catch line and captions. I'm not even exactly sure what that means. And that's part of the problem when we have changes in administration and changes in city attorneys, we get changes in style, and I have no clue what that means.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's something she took from the county or something. I thank you. I did not see this. Well, I mean, I saw it, but I just assumed it was standard language. But as you said, it isn't in the code elsewhere.
Not a big deal.
It isn't. It's weird. It's just interesting. The law office should know that it's there.
Oh, there she is. Hey.
Yeah, sorry, I got distracted by a toddler. And so I heard
Hi.
and then the weird noise you heard was the toddler that I was muting and chasing. I haven't worked actively on this legislation in a while. I did work on it back, I think, in the original things. But if you copy me on all your comments, I'll see who in the law office is hands-on about it and see if we can address all these questions.
Okay. That'd be excellent. There, as you can see, nothing major. So that's,
yeah. And I do think some of it is change.
Oops. You froze.
We all have slightly different styles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But yes, happy to address all of these so we can keep it moving.
Yeah, and I guess the bigger question, not really germane to this committee, is just standardizing our ordinance language. Because if we see this in some and not in others, but that's the question. So anyway, I'll send you, Ms. Leonard, my 2 questions, and I have 2 questions for Jody. But as you can see, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for your indulgence in my questions there. As you see, I don't have any fundamental problem with this. I thank you all for your answers, and I'm comfortable moving this forward at this point, Mr. Chair.
Excellent. In that case, motion for a favorable recommendation.
So moved.
I will second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Congrats.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I just want to say thank you between Alderman Arnett and Alderman Savage. You know, sometimes you stare at this thing for months, and I just really appreciate the very thorough review you guys did. Thank you so much.
Excellent.
You're welcome. Thank you for getting this together.
So, Alderman Tierney, next one, we're going to have you up for 0722, give you a little break in between those, and 0822. Up next is 0322, which is basically a lease agreement for small cell towers, 5G. Alderman Savage, you were on this committee during the Verizon hearings, and it's the exact same thing, just for New Singular Wireless, aka AT&T. I'm personally really excited about this. It's 5G connection, increased mobility, increased connectivity, and I think it's a good bill. So it's an administrative bill, but do you have any questions for staff?
My only question is for Alderwoman Tierney, just to get an explanation for her amendment.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I'm ready. Trying to pull it up here. Okay, I can wing it. I'm trying to call it up, but I know the amendment. All right, I have like 12 windows open. I'm sorry. Hard. Okay, but go ahead.
That was my only concern, or not concern, I should say. I don't have a concern with your amendment. I just wanted to get an explanation. The legislation I'm fine with overall.
We're talking about the towers, right?
Yes.
03.
Yeah. The objective with the amendment is. Do you want me
to read it to you?
Yeah, read it to me exactly.
So prior to installation of any facilities, the lessee shall notify the city of any existing cables so the city can contact the responsible party to remove any excess and or unnecessary cabling.
Yeah, Assistant City Attorney Leonard and I went back and forth on this. There is an existing problem, as you probably all well know. Mr. Robert Clark calls it, I think he calls it cable pornography. But there's all these loose wires, cable wires that hang on these poles and it's easier for the vendors, whether they're Comcast or Verizon. So they don't have to splice. They have this extra wire. So, and so we just didn't want, the residents are very vocal about this. We just didn't want a compounded error, if you will, like, whoa, you're going to add to this pole and it's got all this stuff on it, but they don't have any relationship. The new guy doesn't have any relationship with the old guy. The best we could do was for them to notify us to say, look, you told me to tell you that there's existing wire here. So can the city of Annapolis contact Verizon and or whoever it is to clean up this wire? So it's just a communication tool that we could do to address it.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. I'm good with that. And I'm good to move legislation, Mr. Chair, if you are.
Excellent. Do I have a favorable recommendation then?
So moved.
I will second. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. Excellent. Up next.
And Mr. Chair, just to clarify, that's a motion as amended, right?
Yes, motion. I apologize. Takia, for point of order, do we have to re-examine it to bring it up as amended? Can we just say this was report, bring it up as amended? What's the procedure here?
You can just restate the motion and resecond it.
Okay, so restating the motion to give a favorable recommendation to 0322 as amended. Do I have the motion?
So moved.
Second. All those in favor for 0322 as amended? Aye.
Aye.
Excellent. All righty. Up next, 0722 rental operators license. Alderwoman Tierney.
Oh, right, that one. Yes, what this is I call it sort of a clarification in the code. The objective is when the STR bill was passed a couple of years ago, one of the regulations was to help with the kind of all the quantity of them was you can only have one full house rental, and it's very clear in the code. However, there is a way that the code can be, I don't know what the word is, but what we have is some owners that have formed multiple LLCs to purchase more than one. I can't be specific publicly on what there was. Well, actually, I think it was in the newspaper that these multiple purchases have been made by one entity. So this just cleans that up and prevents that from happening again. And again, this is something where we want to intervene in a way, because when these properties are bought for, an inn or whatever, there's no residential option. There's no apartment use or anything like that. So this just inserts a phrase and includes LLCs as what an owner can be. It went through twice, because the first time at the law office misunderstood and thought that I meant if you had an LLC, you couldn't have a STR, but it's meant that you can only have one. Excuse me, I'm getting tongue-tied. three committees. Anyways, yeah. So it's just to define LLC as an owner and subject to the requirement in that specific paragraph.
All right. Alderman Savage, then Alderman Arnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I support this. I think it's a good idea in light of the situation we've seen rise up. I get my only one question, not to open up a can of worms, but do you think there's any compelling reason to, and not that I'm pushing for this, but do you think there's any compelling reason to open this up to two, to say somebody could have two properties, STRs, or do you think it's important to stick to just one, to cap at one?
I mean, I think with the limited inventory of these buildings, one person to one property, I think that was well received as a compromise. That original legislation was sort of a give and take, and that was definitely one of the gives to the residents. Alderman Arnett can speak to that. That was well received. Like, thank you. That. Okay. Because then you're really monetizing. You're starting to monetize the residential areas.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, at some point, if we ever look to make multiple, one way to do it might be to say you could have you can't have two on one street or something like that.
I think ultimately, I've talked to this with, other, I can't think of her name, Margulis and others, that what we haven't done with short-term rentals, I certainly don't want to lead the charge, but like we did with ADUs, we did a use table, and just address certain, in certain caveats, because again, this is citywide. I don't know why it's focused so much on Ward 1, because Ward 2 and Ward 8 are the same situation. So ultimately that's what we should do, but I don't think we have the appetite. I don't think we have the political will right now to do that.
Yeah, fair enough. That's all I had, Mr. Chair.
Excellent. Alderman Arnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Alderwoman Tierney is absolutely correct. This corrects a situation that was a concern when we passed the original legislation. It's totally consistent with the compromises that were made at the time of the original legislation. I don't remember whatever, I must be rules also agreed that this was good legislation, and I complimented. I wanted to go back to the past one. I also complimented Alderwoman Tierney on trying to get rid of all that hanging copper wire. It is just horrible. But yes, this is good legislation in my mind.
All right. Anything else, colleagues? In that case, do I have a motion for a favorable recommendation for 07022?
You do. Yes. So moved.
I will second. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Excellent. And up, finally, 0822, alcoholic beverages at the Market House. Alderman Tierney.
Well, let's see. Well, just as far as the logistics here, and it's weird because the Market House, this requires a code change because for whatever reason, I'm not that old to go back to when this code was written, that they prohibited anything other than beer and wine at the Market House. It was in the code. So that's what they did the last couple of years. So economically, I don't think there's any other reason I can say economically, competitively, they're asking for a code change. They still have to go before the liquor board to get a liquor license. I've said to my constituents, that's why I think, I don't know, we haven't gotten any outrage or anything, but you know, the problem downtown isn't really, you know, rum and liquor. It's, you know, beer. You know, I mean, you know, I don't want to be specific, but I will be. I mean, you don't see problems outside of Dry 85, you know. I don't know what I'm trying to say, but a liquor license is a liquor license. Don't quote me.
I will say that, yeah, I mean, most of the shenanigans downtown do tend to be younger folks consuming beer or the new hard seltzers. So,
well, I'm talking about beer. I'm not talking about micro beer like in Forward and stuff, but
no, I know what you mean. You're talking like some of those more accessible for certain income levels.
Beer on tap.
So yeah, I think this is a good idea. I'm personally gung-ho on expanding access to this sort of thing. I do think it adds a nice atmosphere for what we're trying to go for that space. So Alderman Savage, I saw you have your hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I support this, and it's nice that it'll generate a little bit of revenue.
Oh yes,
every bit
you
counts.
saw that.
So yeah. So,
I don't know how they
amount, but
I don't know how they figured that out. How do they know that?
Yeah.
I mean, people are going to order. I don't know.
Yeah.
Higher markup on spirits usually.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll make a motion for a favorable recommendation to 0822.
I will second it. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Excellent. All righty. Next up on the agenda, number 3, general discussion. Update from the Economic Development Manager, Stephen Rice, and Hope Stewart. Is there Mr. Rice and Ms. Stewart here?
Mr. Rice is here. Ms. Stewart is not, and he's coming up right now.
Excellent. Thank you.
Hello.
Hey, Mr. Rice, how are you, sir?
Good, good. How's everybody?
Fantastic.
Good.
I will, I know it's been a long meeting, so I'll try to be brief. The short story is that things are going pretty well in Annapolis from an economic standpoint. We have 14 new expanded or relocated businesses to the city since the beginning of the year. Our combined commercial vacancy rate is 4.8%. We had one ribbon cutting in January. That was Kogan Dojo at 1912 Forest Drive. We have supported the launch of the Inclusive Ventures program at Arundel Economic Development Corporation. This is a program for small, women-owned, minority-owned, and veteran-owned businesses. And they are provided as part of the program with education, mentorship, and access to capital. At the end of the program, each business actually is awarded $5,000. It's pretty neat. We have also co-hosted a webinar workshop series with Anne Arundel Economic Development, the State Department of Labor, and the State Department of Commerce. We did that during the month of January. It was called Webinar Wednesdays. And Economic Development during the month of January provided assistance to 51 businesses and partners.
Excellent. So very good news. For the information of the committee members and our two guests today, Mr. Rice, along with Ms. Stewart, and I had a meeting about 2 or 3 weeks back with Chris Gibbons, who is in charge of the National Center for Economic Gardening. Our goal is to, come budget time, introduce an amendment to launch a pilot program for economic gardening, which you may have heard me talk about, but it's essentially, instead of spending a bunch of resources chasing out of town companies and sending all the money out of the community, we go to a bunch of local entrepreneurs, stage 2 companies that have a lot of potential to grow, and talk to them about what they need to actually hire local members of our community and bring money back in. So I think the meeting went very well. If I'm correct, Mr. Rice, you identified a couple potential businesses for potentially pursuing this pilot.
Yes, we have looked through different lists to try to identify some businesses that could be potential beneficiaries. We've also spoken with some organizations that have operated this sort of program and they've had some success. So as far as our research is concerned, things are going well.
Excellent. So as we get closer to the budget and as we continue to work, I look forward to updating my colleagues both on the committee and outside of the committee on that process. Mr. Rice, anything else for us?
That's all from me.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time, sir.
Thank you.
Excellent. Now, barring anything else, is there anything else from any of my colleagues here? Excellent. In that case, do I have a motion to adjourn?
Yes, I move we adjourn.
I will second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.